This is BBC 5 Live.
And the latest news. The Scottish Government has put plans for a second independence referendum on hold. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has told MSP she's postponing another vote until after the Brexit negotiations. Kezia Dugdale, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, has been speaking in Holyrood.
First Minister, why don't you understand? The people of Scotland sent you a clear message at the general election. Get back to governing. When will you listen and get on with the job that really matters, improving our schools, growing our economy and fixing our NHS?
Firms around the globe are reporting they've been hit by a major cyber attack. The British advertising agency, WPP, is among dozens of firms reporting problems. Ukraine appears to be the worst affected, with banks, government ministries and Kiev airport targeted. The Prime Minister is calling for an urgent national investigation into the use of cladding on buildings. So far, 95 high-rises have failed safety tests following the Grenfell Tower fire. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
I think it's still unclear exactly what the regulations were, what tests were conducted, and how the material fits into the wider design of the building. A material can fail a safety check, but that doesn't mean that the whole building itself is unsafe.
The European Commission has fined Google more than £2 billion. It found the company prioritised its own shopping comparison service in search results. Richard Stables is the CEI of the Kelku Group, another price comparison site.
Before Google decided it was going to promote itself, who did it have at the top of the listings? Lots of search comparison sites, like Kelku. We were the ones that provided great results for consumers. And Google said, this is good. And then they realised that we were a threat to them. So what they decided to do, let's take them out of the market and put ourselves at the top.
Google is considering whether or not to appeal. A gang who tortured and killed a vulnerable man on Tyneside have been jailed. Jimmy Proud was found dead near his home in North Shields after sustained abuse. 4 people have received sentences ranging from 9 to 33 years. A British Sikh couple claim they're unable to adopt a white child because of their ethnic background. Sandeep and Reena Manda say they were rejected by their local adoption agency, Adopt Berkshire. Alice Noon is from the adoption charity Coram in London.
The law is really clear about prioritising all of children's needs and not exclusively thinking about ethnicity and ethnic match. You know, there are a lot of children who need permanent families through adoption, and they should have the opportunity of a family, whatever their race and background.
A spokesman for Adopt Berkshire says they don't comment on ongoing court cases. Doctors are calling on the government to decriminalise abortion. Under the current rules, women in England and Wales have to prove continuing with the pregnancy would harm their health and well-being in order to get a termination. The British Medical Association says that needs to change. And the Bank of England says it's concerned about a sharp rise in consumer borrowing through credit cards, personal loans and car finance. It's told lenders to put aside more than £11 billion to protect against economic risks. That's the news. Now the latest sport with Dennis.
Afternoon, Adrian. A century each from Heather Knight and Nat Siver has put England in control of their World Cup group match against Pakistan in Leicester. Emmy Moran can bring us the latest.
Pakistan in response to the 21st over 75 for 3. England's 3 wickets picked up, 2 for Catherine Brunt, 1 for Alex Hartley. And the good news from an England point of view is with rain set to come in later on in the afternoon, we have had the 20 overs required in the Pakistan innings to constitute a match. England well ahead of the game. Pakistan 76 for 3 in the 21st. Their target, a massive 378.
The EFL has welcomed Shrewsbury Town's application to become the first league club to introduce safe standing before the end of next season. 6 days to go until the start of the defence of his Wimbledon title, but Andy Murray has withdrawn from today's exhibition match at the Hurlington Club due to a sore hip. The Lions head coach Warren Gatland says Ian Henderson and Courtney Laws have played themselves into test contention following today's 31-all draw against the Hurricanes in Wellington. And WADA has given the Russian anti-doping agency permission to resume testing under supervision. It follows last year's report which claimed more than 1,000 Russian athletes benefited from a state-sponsored doping programme.
This is BBC 5 Live on digital, online, smartphone and tablet.
And the latest weather forecast tonight, cloudy and mild with some heavy rain across the south. Elsewhere it will be drier with rain easing. Tomorrow becoming drier across southern England and Wales. It will also be largely dry across Scotland. However, it will be wet elsewhere. Now the travel with Orna Merchant.
Thanks, Adrian. The M60, a couple of breakdowns on the anti-clockwise side. One at junction 16 for Pendlebury towards the M61 at 15. One of the lanes is still blocked. The other one's gone now, just ahead. The M4 in Wiltshire, westbound queues at 16 for Swindon West. There was an accident which has been moved to the hard shoulder. All lanes are open. I'll have your full update in the next 10 minutes.
Take 5 Live on the go. On digital, online, smartphone and tablet. 5 Live Drive.
Good afternoon, welcome to Drive today with Adrian Goldberg and Anna Foster. And our main story is that the Scottish Government has abandoned its plans for a second independence referendum. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said she wants to reset the timings on a second vote and will ask the Scottish people to decide once the Brexit negotiations are over.
Speaking in Holyrood, she also told MSPs that she would now redouble her efforts to keep the country in the single European market. But she said since the general election, in which the SNP lost 21 seats, she had listened to voters and understood their concerns about another poll.
I want to reassure people that our proposal is not for a referendum now or before there is sufficient clarity about the options, but rather to give them a choice at the end of the Brexit process when that clarity has emerged. I am therefore confirming today that, having listened and reflected, the Scottish Government will reset the plan I set out on March the 13th. We will not seek to introduce the legislation for an independence referendum immediately. Instead, we will, in good faith, redouble our efforts and put our shoulder to the wheel in seeking to influence the Brexit talks in a way that protects Scotland's interests. We will seek to build maximum support around the proposals set out in the paper that we published in December, Scotland's Place in Europe, to keep us in the single market with substantial new powers for this Parliament. We will do everything we can to influence the UK in that direction. And then at the end of this period of negotiation with the EU, likely to be around next autumn, when the terms of Brexit will be clearer, we will come back to Parliament to set out our judgment on the best way forward at that time, including our view on the precise timescale for offering people a choice over the country's future. Setting out this position today, I'm also issuing a challenge to the other parties. The Scottish Government will stand the best chance of positively influencing the Brexit outcome if we are at the table with the full backing of our national Parliament, arguing for the sensible option of staying in the single market. So join us now with no equivocation. Back the demands for the democratically elected Scottish Government to be at the table, able to influence the UK's negotiating strategy, and for Scotland and the UK to stay in the European single market.
That's Nicola Sturgeon speaking at Holyrood a little earlier. Well, our Scotland correspondent is James Shaw. James, hello.
Hi there.
It was an interesting speech, wasn't it? Because it was full of very positive and determined language, but at the centre of it was quite a sizable concession.
Yes, I mean, I liked the way that you put it earlier on when you talked about resetting the timings. It's kind of like an alarm clock, isn't it? You know, originally you set the alarm at 6, then you change your mind and set it for 7 to give yourself another hour's sleep. But the fact is you still have to wake up at some point, and that's the case with the SNP and the idea of an independence referendum. They've kicked it into the long grass. I promised to myself I wouldn't use that metaphor, but I've done it. They've kicked it into the long grass. So, you know, they're not going to have to make a decision about it for at least a year, but at some point it's going to come back. They're going to look at Brexit and the kind of deal that the UK government has got, and they're going to have to say to voters in Scotland, yes, there is going to be a referendum, or we're going to push for one, or possibly, no, we're not. But I think that's very unlikely, because in the SNP's constitution it says, you know, we want independence. So it's really impossible for them to decide that they're never going to have a referendum. They have to want it. It's part of the DNA.
Yeah, I mean, they pushed for it so very strongly just a few months ago, and I remember you were with us when that vote came through in the Scottish Parliament. So given all of that effort, and given the, again, we talk about metaphors we don't want to use. I don't want to say U-turn, because as you say, eventually it'll come back the other way again, but how much of that was informed by the election results?
Yes, I toyed with using the expression U-turn in the end.
I did it for you.
Do you know what? Yeah, I thought probably it wasn't appropriate, because it's a delay, isn't it? It's not that they're going back. If the SNP was saying, we're not going to have a referendum, that would be a U-turn. But what they're saying is we're going to delay it. I mean, we'll have to see in the future whether there is a referendum, you know, what happens in the autumn of 2018. But really, I think what happened for Nicola Sturgeon was she said to Theresa May, we've got to have this referendum because you're forcing a hard Brexit on Scotland, and people in Scotland voted to stay in the EU. And then Theresa May called a general election, which no one expected, and that general election delivered not just losses for the Conservatives, which we know about, but losses for the SNP as well. And the feeling is that one of the reasons for the losses was this prospect of an independence referendum. So that's really why Nicola Sturgeon has had to rethink it, because she got a message from the voters.
Well, yeah, I mean, how did the newly refreshed, the newly re-strengthened Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems respond to what they heard from her then?
Well, I mean, I suppose it is a vindication, in particular for Ruth Davidson, who's been a very lively performer in the Scottish Parliament for a long time and now has this profile as a successful Conservative, standing out amongst, you know, others of her colleagues maybe south of the border. So for her, it's a vindication, because the campaign that she ran in Scotland was all about vote for us if you don't want an independence referendum, and their vote was boosted enormously. They inflicted serious losses on the SNP, albeit the SNP is still the biggest party, gets the biggest share of the vote. They did suffer a bit of punishment, and we're in a new reality, I think, for Scottish politics in terms of what is possible for the SNP and also what's possible for the Conservatives as well.
Thank you, James. That's our reporter, James Shaw. Well, the SNP aren't available for interview this afternoon. We did ask. Let's speak to Blair Jenkins, who was Chief Executive of the Yes Scotland campaign for Scottish independence back in the 2014 referendum. Hello.
Good afternoon, Anna.
How much of a backtrack does this feel to you?
I don't think it feels like a backtrack at all. I think it was very clear, a very measured statement from Nicola Sturgeon. She made it very clear that there will be an independence referendum at the end of the Brexit process. So all that's happened, I think, is that, like everyone else at the moment...
She didn't necessarily say... She said that there would be a vote on Scotland's future direction at the end of the Brexit process. I don't think she put it as explicitly as another independence referendum, did she?
I think I took it very clearly that she said that Scotland will make a choice at the end of the Brexit process and has every right to make that choice. So, I certainly would have interpreted it as meaning quite unequivocally that at the end of the Brexit process, people in Scotland will, as they've indicated they wish to do, have a choice between being part of whatever the Brexit process is for the UK or becoming an independent country. I think the only thing that would prevent that independence referendum, and again this is consistent with what the SNP have said up till now, would be if somehow the Brexit deal ends up being the UK staying within the single market. I think if that were to happen, and who knows, you know, things change week to week now.
It seems, you're right, I mean, it does. It seems unlikely at the moment, doesn't it? Theresa May's made it quite clear, and so is David Davis, who's leading those negotiations, that's not what they're after.
Well, to be honest, I mean, the UK government has for some time now been doing a passable impersonation of the Keystone Cops. I mean, they're all bumping into one another and running blindly around. It's been a chaotic performance, the like of which I haven't seen.
On the single market point, though?
Well, they have. I would agree that that's one of the few things they've said, although the logic of the position doesn't seem all that clear when they say they want tariff-free trade with the rest of the European Union. So, I mean, we are in a position where things change day to day, week to week now. So all I'm saying really is I agree with you. I don't think it's much of a possibility, but on the basis that there is just that slight possibility that things change and the UK ended up staying within the single market, then that would be the only circumstance in which I think there would not be a Scottish independence referendum.
Yeah, well, what would you say to those people who point out that the SNP losing 21 seats in the election was a rejection of Nicola Sturgeon's position on a second independence referendum?
No, Scottish independence wasn't on the ballot paper earlier this month.
She talked about it was in the manifesto.
Well, there were people who worked alongside me in Yes Scotland in 2014 who were campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party in the election we've just had, and they still support Yes. It's just they felt that primarily it was a contest between Corbyn and May as to who was to be UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but she did say very clearly when the manifesto was being launched that if the SNP wins, well, the way she put it was, wins a majority, well, exactly, which she did. She said that would further reinforce the mandate, but at the time people said that was weak to say a majority of seats.
I think what she was recognising is that the UK general election was not primarily about the issue of Scottish independence. The basis on which we'll be having another referendum is that there was a clear mandate from the 2016 Scottish election. It was in the manifesto. You have to pass several substantial conditions to have a referendum. It was in the manifesto. They won the election very, very clearly with a bigger share of the vote than either the Tories or Labour Party have managed for 50 years in the UK, 47%. They won it out the park. They then managed to form a government. They got support in the Scottish Parliament for an independence referendum. Now, to be honest, at the end of the day, if you believe in parliamentary democracy, that is an absolutely unchallengeable mandate for an independence referendum.
What about the fact that Alex Salmond lost his seat, Angus Robertson lost his seat? Does that not send any kind of message?
Well, I mean, I'm not in the SNP, and the SNP...
No, I know. It's the point I'm making.
Yeah, but the SNP suffered some losses in the general election campaign, including, as you say, some of the well-known people. And
the big beasts.
No doubt they'll be having an internal debate about the general election campaign that they ran. But the Scottish independence issue is much bigger and broader than party politics. And a great many people who are involved in the Yes movement are not members of any political party, like myself. So I don't think you can see the general election, the UK general election, through the prism of Scottish independence or the Scottish independence debate. The argument for an independence referendum is there in its own right. I think that it's right at the moment to focus on Brexit. I think people are deeply worried, very, very worried in this part of the world, and I'm sure where you are as well, about what the final outcome of the Brexit deal will be. Let's focus on getting the best Brexit deal, but at some point, and it will be some point in the next 4 years, because the mandate is for this Parliament, at some point in the next 4 years, towards the end of the next 4 years, I suspect, there will be a Scottish independence referendum.
Blair Jenkins, thank you. Was Chief Executive of the Yes Scotland campaign for Scottish independence and the 2014 referendum. Let us know what you think. 85058 on the text at BBC 5 Live. Some coming in already. This one says, yep, she's changed her mind, just like the Prime Minister did with her manifesto policies. This one says, if we stay in the single market, we do not have Brexit. How can she not get this? Eric in Carlisle says Nicola Sturgeon knows when to retreat. Weigh in, tell us your thoughts. 85058. We'll talk more about this after 5 on Drive. 17 minutes past 4 now.
This is 5 Live Drive.
And the latest headlines. Nicola Sturgeon has decided to put off a second Scottish independence referendum until Brexit negotiations are completed. A major cyber attack is affecting companies around the world, and 95 tower blocks in England are now known to contain cladding, which has failed fire safety tests. Travel with Orna.
Thanks, Adrian. The M8 in Glasgow still looking busy westbound at Charing Cross, junction 18. That's where the accident was, but all lanes are open. Queues are backing up to 16 at Craighall. The M62 westbound approaching Manchester and junction 19 at Hayward through to the Simister Island at junction 18. There's been a broken down car, one lane closed there. The M60 anti-clockwise from 16 to junction 15 at the M61. Another breakdown there with one lane blocked in the roadworks. The M4 and really slow through Wiltshire on the westbound side. It's junction 16 at Swindon West through to Chippenham at junction 17 after an accident there. It's on the hard shoulder. The M25, still that heavy downpour which caused the problems really. It was affecting visibility around junction 9, seems to be pretty bad. Around Leatherhead, everywhere else not doing too badly. The M25 again and anti-clockwise, 24 at Potters Bar to 23 at South Mims. We've had one of the lanes down there because of a breakdown. It's a lorry, so it's taking a while. And the A20 looking really slow on the eastbound side towards the port of Dover. That's because they have traffic management in place. It's Dover Tap where the lorries queue in lane 1 and other traffic uses lane 2. Warner mentioned 5 Live Travel.
Brexit cast. Wolverhampton, 63% leave.
Brexit means Brexit.
As the Brexit negotiations begin, so does Brexit Cast.
Our weekly podcast will follow the twists and turns of the talks with me, Chris Mason, here in Westminster.
And me, Adam Fleming, here in Brussels. We'll tell you what's really going on behind the scenes.
We'll be there for any key moments.
Brexit Cast.
Download the podcast now.
From BBC Politics and BBC 5 Live.
It's a huge day for the England under-21s as they play Germany in the European Under-21 Championship semi-final in Poland. Kick-off is at 5 p.m. The BBC senior football reporter Ian Dennis and the former England captain Terry Butcher are both there. Ian, Terry, good welcome along. What's the mood like, Ian, ahead of this game?
I've got to say, Adrian, the mood in the camp is very relaxed. They're upbeat, they're confident as well, and they do believe. The conditions here in Tiki, overcast and humid. But England are playing with momentum, and that's the one thing that, as Terry will know, having played in 3 World Cups for his country, that's what you need in tournament football. It's all about momentum, and England have been getting much better as the competition has gone on.
And what's the latest team news?
Well, the team news is a big boost. Nathaniel Chalobah starts. He was a doubt. The Chelsea midfielder had a groin injury. didn't look like he was going to make it. Missed training yesterday, certainly for the first 15 minutes that we were able to watch. So he is fit. Nathan Redmond, though, is only on the bench. He's got a hamstring injury, so they've made 2 changes. Tammy Abraham comes in. Will Hughes starts for Swift as well. So they're going to still play with the diamond, with Lewis Baker at the tip of the diamond, and Germany have made 2 changes, and interestingly, they've changed their formation as well, because they've had to have a very settled side throughout the group stages.
How good are Germany?
Well, I think they're very good. I mean, they sailed through their qualification group. They've had a couple of defeats in friendlies, but they are very strong. They beat England last time out in March, so they've got good experience, and they played very well that day, although they did play with a back 3, but I think it's a very versatile German side. About half a dozen of the German stars that should have been here for the under-21s actually were in the national team in the Confederations Cup, are still there, so you know, they've got great strength in depth and good experience.
Yeah.
Interesting, you look at the back 4s, England's back 4, summary of the caps is 21 caps in total, whereas the German back 4 summary is 53, so they have got good experience.
I wonder what the comparison is as well for league matches played. I know Damari Gray, who's been a really important player for England under 21s in this tournament, was demanding more game time from Leicester City. I wonder how the German players comparing Bundesliga experience compared to the England players with Premier League experience.
Well, when they actually played in March, and they were very impressive, the Germans, they won by a goal to 0, but they outclassed England. On that occasion, the Germans had 1,137 appearances in the Bundesliga, and England had 206 in their squad who played in the Premier League. So whilst it's been it's been an excellent summer for England's development teams, that is now always going to be the problem, whether you're under 20s or under 21s. As you've mentioned, Damari Gray, it's getting that regular football.
Yeah, and you can see why Ian Dennis never comes out of his room with stats like that.
It was a great stat, let's be honest about it, Terry.
I can't match that, I won't try either.
I've got to say that there's a lad who comes on 5 Live and he's a German expert, Archie Rhein-Tutt, and it was Archie's stat that I managed to nick.
You know what, Terry, you and I spoke a few weeks ago after England had won the Under-20 World Cup. Now the Under-21s are on the brink of a European Championship final. We're probably both old enough to remember 2 or 3 golden generations coming through, but there is clearly some quality there.
There is, and the 17s are in the World Cup final as well, and unfortunately lost that. And England have won the Toulon tournament 2 years in a row as well. So you'd have to say that at the age groups, from 17 upwards to 21, it's very, very good. It's making that next jump that's always the problem. The Germans were saying, Neuer, who played in 2009 when they beat England 4-0, the German goalkeeper, he said that the players did well together, but then they went away and became regular first teamers for their country in the senior team. So there's still a lot of work to do for the players to get into the senior team, but if they can get regular games at their club or go on loan and get regular games as well, then that really does stand them in stead, because game knowledge is so important.
Ian, it's England v Germany in a semi-final. Have they been practising penalties?
Well, it's interesting that England have, and they've been practising them after every training session for the last month. But Stefan Kuntz, who is the German coach, scored against England in Euro '96 semi-final at Wembley, and was actually due to take, and did take, the 5th penalty, but wasn't preparing to take the 5th penalty because he just didn't think that it would get that far. And he said in the press conference, he's a real character. He said that my heart was down at my pants when it came to that moment. But he was actually saying yesterday that he doesn't feel the need to take penalties. He says it makes no sense to train. And just a word of warning, and I know we're going to keep you up to date with regular updates on 5 Live, and the commentary will be on the BBC Sport website and the BBC Sport app if you're heading home out of the office. But the last 2 times that England have got to a semi-final at this stage, both semi-finals have gone to a penalty shootout. 2007 against Holland, which was an absolute epic, still a UEFA record, I think, 32 penalties that particular day. But England, although they were knocked out on that occasion, bounced back 2 years later to beat the host Sweden in 2009. So there's just a word of warning that we might go the full distance.
OK, we'll certainly be catching up with you a little later. Thank you, Ian Dennis and Terry Butcher. And as Ian says, you can hear full commentary on the BBC Sport website and app, and updates throughout the programme here on Drive. Kick-off is at 5 p.m.
I do love a good stat. I love it when there's one. Well, I always like it when there's a script written, it's got a really good stat in. I used to do it a lot with Laura when the season's on, where you can throw it in and sound really knowledgeable. If there is a particularly good one, It doesn't need to be a sporting one.
The most amazing statistic.
The one that you trot out at dinner parties and pub quizzes. The one that's likely to win you a pub quiz. 85058 at BBC 5 Live. We'll try and squeeze some of those in as well. It's 4:25 now on Drive, and Theresa May says there needs to be a major national investigation into how cladding's been used on high-rise buildings, which could span decades. So far, 95 high-rise buildings in 32 local authorities have failed those fire safety checks that were ordered following the fire at Grenfell Tower. It is a failure rate of 100%. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has said that the police are working hard to identify the victims following the Grenfell fire, but that many grieving people have very little confidence in officials.
And I recognise that the police are working incredibly hard. I recognise that forensics on the ground is a really difficult task. I welcome the fact that the team around New York in 9/11 are now helping the police service do this incredibly difficult task. But, you know, I can't run away from the fact that when I speak to residents in North Kent, they relay to me the lack of confidence they've got in officialdom.
Well, the Prime Minister's already ordered a full judge-led public inquiry into the Grenfell fire itself on 5 Live Breakfast this morning. As the focus moves on to safety in other high-rise residential blocks, Rachel spoke to Layla and Hassan, 2 residents in a neighbouring block to Grenfell Tower, who say they and their neighbours have been left traumatised.
All the neighbours you see, you know, some of them, they didn't even want to talk about it. And some of them, to be honest, they lost it. Completely, they lost it. You know, I got my next door neighbor, you know, he need help, he need counseling. I saw him yesterday, he just told me I'm lost. I can't help it anymore. I walked down in the corridor and I met my other neighbors. They all, to be honest, they just say they don't know what to do anymore. They just lost.
Because this is people's lives, people's homes, everything around that, schools, the whole...
We feel like we lost the whole world.
I know some of my neighbours, one particular neighbour, he's suicidal at the moment. I had to speak to him and I had to just calm him down, and you know, it's really hard because each resident all of our neighbours is going through something different. Another neighbour that I know, he's starting to drink again because he can't cope with it. And they are seeing counselling, but clearly counselling is not enough because it's just, you know, this has scarred us all for life. Just seeing that, and just, you know, when sleeping at night, you don't know if you're going to die or not, because we don't know if that tower's going to fall, because if it falls, it's going to fall straight onto our block. But we have nowhere to go. That's the thing. It's just really scary. Everyone is scared. Everyone.
Let's talk about some of that with Matthew Needham-Lang, who's an architect, head of construction at Catton Law UK. Hello, Matthew.
Hello.
People living around there, and when you see that tower and stand up close to it, as I did the other week, in some ways it's almost impossible to see how it's still standing. Is that a legitimate fear that people have, that it might come down?
No, I think the fire brigade obviously risk their lives when there's danger, but now they're in the investigative mode. I'd be very surprised if they were going in there and investigating the structure and what's happened before it had been made properly safe. So I think the likelihood of it falling down is somewhat limited, to tell the truth. It's a concrete structure. Concrete is affected by fire, but it's very resistant. It spalls and cracks, but I think the fire brigade would have gone in there with structural engineers and made sure that everything was safe before they started going in there and investigating.
Yeah. What would you make of this huge testing programme that's started on the cladding and is actually going far slower than Theresa May had suggested that it would at the start?
Well, I think the results are shocking. That's the only way to describe it. There's obviously been a systemic failure throughout the construction industry. If these are the results that are coming in, 100% failure rate on 95 blocks is just incredible.
So how did we get, I mean, people will ask how we got to that position in the first place. Do we even know what the building regulations are supposed to be?
Yes, the actual regulations themselves are remarkably short and concise, and they set out broad principles, and that's all. So for external flame spread on a building, they basically just say that a building shall have adequate resistance to spread of fire over walls from one building to another.
Yeah. So how did they get approved then if the cladding clearly isn't safe in 100% of cases so far?
Well, I think that is a burning question, to tell the truth. There's a lot of guidance on how you try and achieve that very broad standard. but to have a 100% failure rate is quite surprising. Although I kind of anticipated that it would be a widespread problem when the fire first sort of occurred, and I was talking about it then, saying this sort of system of cladding buildings is not unusual. I had no idea that we'd be looking at a 100% failure rate. I thought maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 maybe, but not 100%.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to think that something that proved so dangerous in the end, wasn't even being talked about or looked into before this.
I think, so people in the know, I suppose. I think it was being talked about by people who were involved in high-rise buildings and had seen what had happened in other countries.
That's almost worse then, isn't it, if it was on the radar?
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And it had been on the radar for some time. It hadn't been kind of a recent thing. It had been on the radar for some time. And there'd been a report by the London Assembly, I think in 2013, on the problems of fire in high-rise apartment buildings. There'd been the Lakanal House inquiry, which made various recommendations. So the problem had been on the radar for probably close to 10 years. What I don't think was anticipated was just how serious a problem it was in relation to the cladding that was being used. But it was a problem that was known about, certainly.
Matthew, thank you. Matthew Needham-Lang there, who's an architect and head of construction at Catton Law UK. You're listening to Drive. It's just gone 4:30.
On digital, online, smartphone and tablet, this is BBC 5 Live.
And the latest 5 Live news. Nicola Sturgeon has announced she's resetting plans for a second Scottish independence referendum. The First Minister says the idea will be postponed until after Brexit negotiations are completed. Companies around the world are reporting they've been hit by a major cyber attack. The British advertising agency WPP is among dozens of firms reporting problems. Some experts think it could be a ransomware attack, similar to the WannaCry, which hit the NHS last month. The Prime Minister is calling for an urgent national investigation into the use of cladding on buildings. So far, 95 high-rises have failed safety tests following the Grenfell Tower fire. And Google says it's considering appealing against a record fine handed down by the European Commission. It's been told to pay more than £2 billion for promoting its own shopping service. That's the news. Now the sport with Delith.
Centuries from Heather Knight and Nat Siva mean Pakistan have it all to do against England in the ICC Women's World Cup. Henry Moran is watching in Leicester, where it's just started to rain.
Well, it has. Raining sixes during England's innings, 377 for 7, a record score for England in World Cup cricket. Now it's just raining rain, which has prevented Pakistan from growing their score, which currently stands at 107 for 3 in the 30th over of the innings. The good news from an England perspective is that we do have a game. Having 20 overs having been bowled, it does mean that the match is constituted fully, and regardless if this rain is set in and the match is abandoned, then England would pick up the win. So Pakistan 107 for 3 in response to England's 377 for 7. We're midway through the 30th over, but the covers are coming on.
No raining puns here. Thank you, Henry. It's the second day of a historic round of day and night games in the Specsavers County Championship, although weather is playing its part there as well. Kevin Howells is at Headingley.
Certainly feels more like night than day, to be honest with you. Delith, good afternoon. Yes, Surrey overnight here at Leeds, 374 for 6 versus Yorkshire, but no play so far on day 2 due to rain. Expected to start at 5 o'clock, and of course we can carry on until 10 this evening, but there's still plenty of cloud around and it's very dark. Similar picture elsewhere. So of the games where play has been possible in Division 1, Somerset 43 for 1, Trail Hampshire by 168, Warwickshire 93 for 3, which is 180 runs behind Lancashire at Edgbaston. There are 4 games with action so far in Division 2. Worcestershire going well, 323 for 7, lead Durham by 126 runs with a century for Brett D'Oliveira. Stumbling along Ugla Morgan at 87 for 4, Trail Derbyshire by 201, Leicestershire struggle at Northampton 133 for 8, Trail by 128, and at Trent Bridge the leaders Nottinghamshire 278 for 4, they lead Kent by 98 runs, and Stephen Mullaney very much in form, he's currently 134 not out.
Thank you, Kevin. We may as well check how the weather's faring in Poland, where England's under-21s are just half an hour or so away from the start of their European Championship semi-final against Germany. Ian Dennis, afternoon.
Good afternoon, Delith. It's overcast and humid, and I was going to say that both sides have made 2 changes. However, Nicholas Stark, one of the German central defenders, appears to have just pulled a muscle in his back, and he's actually just gone down to the dressing room. So have to wait to see whether he reappears, but they have made changes. But more importantly, from an England point of view, the 2 changes are that Will Hughes starts for Swift. England will once again play in the diamond formation, and Tammy Abraham for Nathan Redmond, who is on the bench and is fit if required. But a big boost that Nathaniel Chalabar has overcome the groin injury, and England here for this semi-final. Regular updates on 5 Live. We might even have commentary on 5 Live Sports Extra given the cricket situation, but also you can hear commentary on the BBC Sport website.
Great stuff, thank you, Ian. Elsewhere, football's world governing body FIFA has released its full report into alleged corruption in Qatar's successful 2022 World Cup bid. It comes after German newspaper Bild published extracts of a leaked copy of the report earlier today. The EFL has welcomed Shrewsbury Town's application to become the first league club to introduce safe standing before the end of next season. The Lions head coach Warren Gatland says Ian Henderson and Courtney Lawes played themselves into test contention following today's 31-all draw against the Hurricanes. Gatland afterwards brushed off a mocked-up picture of him as a clown on the front of the New Zealand Highland.
You've got to concentrate on your own job and preparing yourself and not worrying about any specific individuals, but trying to be personal. So it's just part of professional sport, you know. So I couldn't give a toss if that was happening.
And Andy Murray has withdrawn from today's exhibition match at the Hurlington Club because of a sore hip. The number 1 is still set to play that on Friday before starting the defence of his Wimbledon title on Monday.
This is BBC 5 Live on digital, online, smartphone and tablet.
I've realised that while it's fascinating reading all these brilliant statistics, most of them I've got no way of knowing if they're actually true or not. Robert in Hearts, for example, says in the last 3 years China has used 1.5 times more cement than the US used in the whole of the 20th century.
I did a quick Google on that. I think it's true.
Is it true? Well,
yeah.
Sometimes a quick Google will prove you right or wrong, and sometimes if they're really involved, it's really difficult. So I can pull that one out at a pub quiz, can I?
You can.
And I'll get a point for it.
I think so. Well, the quizmaster won't know any better. Mark Stato in Bexhill, great stats. Huddersfield got promoted with a minus goal difference. That's an incredible achievement.
Unless you're, well, yes, I was going to say it's a great stat unless you're a Huddersfield fan, in which case you just gloss over that one.
You're still happy, aren't you? Anyway, keep them coming. Your most amazing stats, your pub quiz winners. Drop us a text to 85058. On the weather, tonight's going to be cloudy and mild for most, with heavy rain across much of England throughout the night and later across Wales too. In Northern Ireland and Scotland, rain will ease as the night goes on. Tomorrow, rain will continue to push north, leaving a drier afternoon in southern England and Wales, though it will continue to rain in North Wales, northern England and southern Scotland, where it'll feel chilly, especially along the North Sea coast. And across Scotland, after a damp start, it will be a dry day with a little sunshine. Now the travel update with Orna.
OK, during the M62, so the westbound side still really slow, in from 21 at Milne Road towards 19 at Haywood and on towards 18 at Simister Island. We had a broken down car in one of the lanes. It has cleared, but the queues are still there. And the M25, there was another breakdown. So junction 24, Potters Bar to 23 at South Mims, all lanes open, just delays, and that's all. I'll have more for you in the next 10 minutes.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live. 5 Live Drive.
I'm just watching pictures of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, James Brokenshire, walking towards a cluster of microphones. He's about to make a statement on the power sharing talks.
Hours will be crucial in the formation of a new executive, a new power sharing executive here in Northern Ireland. There has been intensive engagement between the parties since yesterday afternoon. That has continued late into last night and has been continuing today, and the parties continue to discuss the issues of difference to find resolution between them. Today's discussion has focused on matters of equality and of languages, some of the issues which do need to be resolved if we are to see a power-sharing executive restored. Certainly the announcement of a new funding package has provided, I think, that context of an executive able to get on and deliver for Northern Ireland, being able to invest in infrastructure, being able to focus on a strong economy and the creation of jobs and prosperity. But it is important for the parties to continue to engage in the way that they have done, to find that resolution between them, to get on and serve in the best interests of Northern Ireland. I believe that that can be done, but the parties will need to look beyond what divides them and actually look at those issues of common purpose, of what the people here in Northern Ireland want to see, which is the restoration of a power-sharing executive, an inclusive power-sharing executive that will serve for the best interests of all the community. Northern Ireland has come a long way over recent years, and we want to see that progress continuing into the future. That is why there is a real opportunity here to see the restoration of an executive by the statutory deadline of Thursday. That is what the people of Northern Ireland voted for. That is what they want to see, particularly at this time of the UK's departure from the European Union, with all of the issues that are directly relevant to Northern Ireland. I also believe that that is what the parties want to see too. But time is marching on. It is about now reaching that conclusion, meeting that statutory deadline of Thursday afternoon, and finding a way through in the best interests of Northern Ireland. Now, I'll take a few questions. Mark.
Secretary of State, BBC, you say there's the statutory deadline of Thursday.
We'll just leave that there for the moment. That is James Brokenshire, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. We'll listen to those questions. If there's anything notable, I mean, given that statement, I'm not sure there will be. It was very much a holding statement. He says that he believes a deal can be done. He said that that new funding package that was agreed as part of the Conservatives' deal with the DUP, where he suggested that that had focused the mind when it came to these talks, but he certainly didn't come out there and say that a deal was on the table. I mean, Coletta Smith from 5 Live Money, you're here to talk about something different, but actually you were standing in that exact spot yesterday.
Yeah.
It says something that even at this stage, there wasn't really any great amount of detail in that. They still haven't reached an agreement.
No, and actually the two issues that he mentioned are two of the central ones that have been being discussed since February. Exactly, since February or March. So basically he's kind of saying no progress on some of those really key issues. The same stumbling blocks are still there. But as you say, that financial package is a real carrot to be dangled in front of the parties at the moment.
Yeah.
That if they all want to get their hands on being able to have a say in how that money is spent, then they're going to need to cooperate and compromise in some form.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. That deadline, as he was saying there, is Thursday. You're here to talk about Google.
I am.
Which is thinking about appealing against this record fine that it's been given by the European Commission, more than £2 billion, for distorting the market.
Yeah, so it's distorting the market in their shopping service. You might even not realise that Google has a shopping service, but you probably have used it, even by mistake. And that's kind of the issue here, that the European Commission have slapped this massive fine on Google for. Basically, if you search a product, so say you're looking for trainers and you just type trainers into Google, the first thing that'll come up along that top bar is a number of pictures, and they're from a number of different websites. If you click on any of those...
And they pay for that, don't they?
So that is the Google shopping service. So lots of different products. If you type something in, that will pop up as the first thing. So the European Commission say, listen, that's not fair. There are lots of different shopping search sites, and Google shouldn't really put themselves as the favourite, as the top, and that's distorting the market, and in fact it's illegal. So the European Commissioner for Competition, Margrethe Vestager, has, as I say, slapped that huge fine on Google. They're now thinking of appealing it. They say they're going to look through the decision and make a decision themselves a little bit later on. But it's not the first time that Margrethe Vestager has taken on big American global giants. You might remember last year she said Apple had underpaid Ireland by about 13 billion euros in tax, and she wanted that money back. She also has Hollywood studios in her sights at the moment, and she was asked by the BBC how it feels confronting some of the world's biggest companies.
Well, you know, sometimes when I get a little nervous, I think about the 500 million Europeans who has given the Commission these powers. And when you think about 500 million people and working on their behalf, then you don't feel small anymore.
Well, a man that can give us a little insight into what it's like in the world of the European Commission, and particularly working alongside Margrethe Vestager, is Matthew Newman. He's a former spokesman for the Commission, now a Brussels-based specialist for the news agency MLEX. Hi there, Matthew. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
You were there this morning. Was it a surprise, that £2 billion fine? I mean, we were expecting something, but anything on that scale?
Absolutely not. I think this is off the scale. The last time the European Commission had a fine of that level was in 2009, and it was against Intel, and that was 1.06 billion euros. And so when the fine was announced, and we just got the press release under embargo, there was a kind of a collective gasp in the newsroom, like, whoa, this is a lot of money, even for Google.
And do any of these fines actually get paid? I mean, I was mentioning that one against Apple. They decided to appeal. When you're dealing with companies this huge, are they not always just going to get sort of clogged down in a legal mire along the way?
Actually, the European Commission has done exceptionally well when it comes to abuse against dominance cases. They have an extremely good record. You might remember the Microsoft case, and that was around 500 million euros, and that got reduced by something like 20 million euros. So, no, it's absolutely clear that Google will have to pay. Obviously, you said they're considering appealing, and there is no suspensory effect with these appeals. So they will have to put that £2 billion into an escrow account while they appeal.
And also, presumably, change the way their website looks in the meantime.
Well, that's the big problem for Google. They have explained many times that they don't actually know how they're going to implement this particular decision. One thing that they could do that would be quite easy is to